Right, so when the vice president of the world's highest court starts moonlighting as a preacher of the apocalypse, something has gone badly wrong somewhere, hasn't it? Julia Sebutinde, vice president of the International Court of Justice, draped in the robes of international law, has chosen instead to wrap herself in the book of Revelation, it seems, declaring from her pulpit that the Lord is counting on me to stand on the side of Israel. Now, one might expect this kind of sermonizing from a televangelist in Texas or a YouTube prophet with a PayPal link, but not from a judge entrusted with deciding whether a state is committing a genocide. The ICJ is supposed to embody the cool detachment of law. Sebutinde instead offered the fervour of fevered prophecy. In confusing her pulpit with her bench, her faith with the law, she's managed the rare trick of weakening the institution she serves while simultaneously handing Benjamin Netanyahu the soundbite of his dreams. For the court, her words are dynamite, and not in a good way. For Israel, they are manna from heaven. And for those who still cling to the idea that international law might restrain power, they are a brutal reminder of how easily justice can be compromised when belief eclipses duty. The court can take action here, though, and it must, not just for the sake of Palestine, but for the sake of its own sanctity too. Right, so the International Court of Justice has always been in something of a precarious position. It possesses no army, no police, no hard means of enforcement. Its power lies completely in its reputation as a neutral arbiter of disputes between states above all other courts, and above all in its credibility as the world's conscience when confronting the most serious crimes. At no point since its founding has this credibility been tested more acutely than in the current proceedings against Israel. South Africa's case, alleging that Israel's war in Gaza amounts to genocide, something the court has already plausibly accepted, has now also thrust the court into the centre of the fiercest moral and political struggle of our age. It is against this backdrop that Julia Sebutinde, the Ugandan jurist who currently serves as the vice president of the ICJ, delivered remarks that may prove devastating not only to her own reputation, but to the authority of the institution itself. On the 10th of August, speaking at Watoto Church in Kampala, Sebutinde proclaimed, "The Lord is counting on me to stand on the side of Israel. I want to be on the right side of history." These words, reported by the likes of Cuds News Network, Middle East Eye and Five Pillars UK, were not idle. They were delivered in a sermon to her congregation, framed in eschatological language, end of days language as that means. They were made while she sat as vice president of the ICJ, and while Israel remained under investigation for the most serious crimes in international law. They were not framed in terms of statutes or evidence or convention. They were framed in terms of divine command. And the reactions to that were obviously going to be swift. Iran denounced the remarks as a shocking breach of ethics, pointing out the obvious contradiction between a legal mandate to impartiality and a theological mandate to stand with one party in an ongoing case. Uganda's government, long having been embarrassed by Sebutinde, has already distanced itself from her previously. Its UN ambassador, Adonia Ayabare, clarified that Sebutinde's position did not reflect that of the Ugandan state, following the court's January 2024 plausibly proven case of genocide against Israel. Sebutinde, of course, objected to every single item on that agenda. Commentators around the world immediately recognised the danger here and now, though, where her conduct in this case has been highly questionable already up until now. Here was a senior judge now openly proclaiming her bias in a live case of genocide. It's tempting to treat this as just a personal failing or an unfortunate slip of the tongue. Yet the deeper truth is that Sebutinde's statement did not emerge from nowhere. It wasn't said in error. It is consistent with her record on the court, where she has been Israel's lone defender. It is also consistent with her background as a devoted member of Watoto Church, an evangelical congregation with strong links to Christian Zionism, because Zionism and Christian evangelism do seem to walk hand in hand far too often, and it helps to trace their roots in theology, examine their impact on law, and assess the consequences for politics from that. Only then does the dual character of Sebutinde's position emerge. She is simultaneously a threat to the ICJ's integrity and a gift to Israel's strategy of denial and delay. The content of her Watoto sermon bears repeating. She told her audience that she lives in the end times, and that her role at the ICJ was guided by God's will to defend Israel. This was not the language of judicial independence at all. It was the language of prophecy. It was a statement that she saw her role less as the impartial application of international law than as the fulfillment of a divine script. So the implications are clear. If a judge is acting on God's command, then evidence and statutes and obligations under the Genocide Convention all become secondary in her mind. Law is subordinated to theology and her own beliefs. The ICJ statute could not be clearer about what is required of its judges, though. Article 2 specifies that they shall exercise their powers impartially and conscientiously. Judges swear an oath to that effect before taking office. Impartiality is not an aspiration, it is a foundational requirement. By publicly aligning with one party on theological grounds in an ongoing case of genocide, Sebutinde did not merely cast doubt on her own impartiality. She called into question the impartiality of the institution itself, therefore. So if the Vice President of the ICJ can side with Israel because the Lord is counting on her, why should any state trust the court to deliver justice unswayed by ideology? What makes the episode even more explosive is its continuity with her judicial record. In January 2024, when the ICJ issued its first set of provisional measures in South Africa versus Israel, ordering Israel to prevent genocidal acts and ensure the flow of humanitarian aid, Sebutinde was the sole dissenter to that, to all of it. The order was near unanimous, only she opposed it. When the court reaffirmed and modified these measures in March and May, again she dissented. In July of 2024, when the court issued its advisory opinion declaring Israel's occupation of Palestinian territory unlawful, she dissented again. At the time, observers wondered why she was so consistent in opposing measures that commanded near universal agreement among her peers. What interest did she have in this? She's Ugandan. What was her deal? Well, with her Watoto sermon, the answer got revealed, didn't it? These were not neutral legal dissents, they were theological dissents. They were dissents in fidelity to Israel's biblical significance, not in fidelity to law. Her background makes this even clearer. Sebutinde has long been an active member of Watoto Church in Kampala. Back in 2014, speaking at a Watoto event, she said, "I have the chance to practice justice at the world level because of the values I picked from Watoto Church. I am proud of Watoto." Well, Watoto is not an ordinary young congregation. It is one of Uganda's most prominent evangelical churches, founded by Canadian missionaries Gary and Marilyn Skinner. It is embedded in the prosperity, gospel, and charismatic traditions that have swept across sub-Saharan Africa, heavily influenced by American evangelicalism. Crucially, Watoto has cultivated deep ties to Israel and Christian Zionist networks. In October 2023, Watoto Church launched a fundraising campaign explicitly for work in Israel. What an incredible opportunity, the church wrote on Facebook, to participate in the extension of God's kingdom in Israel through our annual My Miracle missions offering. The partner organisation was the Fellowship of Israel-Related Ministries, or FIRM. FIRM describes itself as a global family of believers empowering local ministries to transform lives in Israel. Its stated vision is that every person in Israel is transformed by the love of Yeshua. So this is not neutral religious philanthropy, it is evangelical Zionism, the blending of Christian mission with political support for the state of Israel. Watoto's founding pastor has preached sermons such as Israel, the greatest sign, presenting the modern state as proof of biblical prophecy and as evidence that the end times are near. So when Sebutinde tells her congregation that God wants her to stand with Israel because she is living in the end times, she is speaking the language of Watoto. She is channeling the theology of FIRM. She is expressing the worldview of Christian Zionism. The problem is that she is doing so from the bench of the ICJ in the middle of a genocide case, of course. So the clash between legal mandate and divine mandate could not be more blatant or disturbing, frankly. Why should this matter so much, though, Damo, you might be thinking? Because the ICJ's authority rests entirely on the perception of impartiality, doesn't it? The court has no means to enforce its own judgments. States comply because the rulings carry moral and political weight. That weight comes from the belief that judgments are grounded in law, not belief, not religion, not theology, and not ideology. If judges openly proclaim bias, as Sebutinde has done, that weight evaporates, and we have a big enough issue now with states not complying because their own pro-Israel interests are also superseding such matters. For South Africa, which brought the genocide case, of course, Sebutinde's remarks are devastating. They signal that at least one senior judge is not weighing evidence but following prophecy. For Palestinians, you see the ICJ as one of the few venues where their suffering is recognised. The remarks confirm their deepest fears, that even the world's highest court can be compromised by pro-Israel ideology. The danger goes beyond this case, though. If Sebutinde's bias is tolerated, what precedent does that end up setting? Will other judges feel free to declare their ideological commitments in future disputes, perhaps? Will the court become a platform for competing political and theological visions rather than impartial legal reasoning? It's a thin veneer of neutrality we've got here that's painstakingly been maintained for decades, so it could very, very easily crack. That would not only undermine this Gaza case, it would undermine the entire project of international adjudication. At the same time, what undermines the court strengthens Israel. For Netanyahu, Sebutinde is a propaganda gift. He can now tell his public and his allies, even the ICJ's Vice-President is with us. He can cite her dissents to show that the genocide case is contested and not settled law. He can use her stance to dismiss adverse rulings as political. In order to allow humanitarian aid, he can reply that one of the court's leaders agrees with Israel's view. Every ruling against Israel can be spun as evidence of division. Every ruling in its favour is confirmation of righteousness. And this fits very neatly into Netanyahu's broader strategy. Israel has long sought to delegitimize international legal institutions that scrutinise its conduct, from the ICJ to the International Criminal Court. The aim is to present these bodies as political, biased, or irrelevant. Sebutinde's remarks, therefore, are perfect fodder for that. They allow Israel to argue that the court is split and politicised. They provide cover for delay and denial and non-compliance. They buy time for facts on the ground in Gaza to be entrenched while legal proceedings get dragged out. The paradox is thus complete. Sebutinde is a threat to the ICJ's credibility and simultaneously a gift to Israel's propaganda machine. Her theology weakens the court, even as it strengthens Netanyahu's hand. So then the question becomes one of what can be done then? The ICJ statute does actually provide some mechanisms. Judges can recuse themselves voluntarily if they recognise a conflict of interest, but Sebutinde shows no sign of doing that. Parties to a case can request disqualification of a judge for bias under Article 17. That decision would be made by the rest of the court. South Africa could file such a motion, pointing to her Watoto sermon as proof of bias. The court could also, in theory, remove her entirely under Article 18, if all other judges unanimously agree that she has ceased to fulfil the conditions of office. This is the nuclear option. It would be unprecedented in the ICJ's history if it is carried out, but surely a judge putting her faith above all else in her legal rulings, her faith before law, is pretty unprecedented too. Politically, the UN General Assembly or Security Council could censure her, though US protection of Israel makes Security Council action as unlikely as ever. Of all of these options, disqualification from the genocide case is probably the most plausible, though in my view it doesn't go nearly far enough. She has stated she cannot be impartial when it comes to Israel, and that undermines her credibility in every other case going forward, surely. It would not remove Sebutinde from the court, but it would protect the proceedings from her bias. But if nothing is done, every order will be tainted, every ruling clouded by the knowledge that one of the court's leaders is acting on prophecy rather than law. Until her tenure comes to an end, that would carry on, but that's not until 2030. The Sebutinde affair also raises larger questions about the selection of ICJ judges. Currently, judges are nominated by national groups and elected by the General Assembly and Security Council. There is little scrutiny of ideological affiliations. Should there be more rigorous vetting to ensure impartiality? Should judges with strong religious or political commitments that directly touch on live disputes be disqualified from the outset? The integrity of the court may depend on asking these uncomfortable questions now and factoring such matters in going forwards. The broader implications are sobering, though. For Palestinians, Sebutinde's stance risks erasing one of the few venues where their suffering is recognised. For the Global South, it confirms their long-held fears of double standards in international law. For Israel, it provides a shield to delay accountability. For the ICJ, it threatens to reduce its authority to ashes. International law is already fragile. It survives only because states consent to be bound to it. If the court is seen as compromised, that consent may evaporate. In my view, there is no doubt that Julia Sebutinde has placed the ICJ in jeopardy. Her remarks at Watoto Church reveal a worldview in which Israel is not a state subject to law, but a divine project to be defended at all costs. By proclaiming that she is acting on God's mandate, she's betrayed her oath and endangered the court's credibility. At the same time, she's handed Israel a propaganda weapon to delegitimize rulings and delay compliance. She is both a threat to the ICJ and a gift to Netanyahu. Therefore, the court must act. Either Sebutinde recuses herself or she is disqualified. Anything less will leave the genocide case fatally tainted and the court's authority fatally weakened, as no matter what evidence gets presented, she will vote in Israel's interests each and every time. You know it. The ICJ cannot stand as the conscience of humanity if its judges confuse prophecy with law and allow Sebutinde to carry on doing so. If it fails to draw that line, it will not be remembered as the guardian of justice, but as an institution undone by one judge's conviction that the end times demanded that she sided with Israel. It really shouldn't be a hard call for the court to make. For as much as Sebutinde might be bringing the ICJ into disrepute, there have been some stellar performances there as well. One of these was not during the main South Africa versus Israel case, actually, but during representations that were delivered on behalf of the Arab League against Israel. And their legal representative there, Professor Ralph Wild's calm evisceration of Israel's entire case was absolutely astonishing. So if you've missed that, there's a treat for you here from last year as your recommended next watch to perhaps cheer you up a little bit now. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated, holding power to account for ordinary working class people. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.